Hello and welcome to Lesson 14 of our class, Basics of Biblical Archaeology. Today we're going to pick up where we left off with our study of Jerusalem. So it's the second half of that focus. And we're going to look at Jerusalem after the time of the construction of the first temple. So this is now during the reign of Solomon and following. And there's two main things we want to look at. We want to look at some of the construction that was built at Jerusalem under the reign of Solomon, who, of course, is one of the other people that the critics have said there really wasn't a Solomon that we read about in the Bible, and if there was, he wasn't in the 10th century BC, and he didn't have a kingdom like the Bible describes. So the architecture, especially the monumental architecture at places like Jerusalem, really weighs heavily in rebutting that kind of argument. And then we're going to look at the defenses that were made by Hezekiah at Jerusalem at the time of the invasion of the Neo-Assyrian army in about 701 BC under Sennacherib. So those are the two main things that we want to accomplish today in our look at the city of Jerusalem. Really looking at what does archaeology have to say to help us to see how what we read about in the text becomes clearer and more vivid for us. So here we go, beginning with the time period immediately after the building of the temple, when Solomon began work in the area of Jerusalem with a lot of things to construct. He had his palace to construct, which the Bible makes it clear that he had his own palace, even though the palace of David almost certainly was used throughout the lineage of the kings who sat on the throne after him. Solomon still built his own temple. His own palace. So we want to see some of the construction that was built by Solomon. So our focus is going to be specifically on the fortifications that Solomon built at Jerusalem that help us to see that this is a reflection of a very wealthy and powerful king in Jerusalem. And really the source that you can use if you want to do your own study on it is a book that was written by the archaeologist, the Israeli archaeologist from the Jerusalem area named Eilat Mazar. And that book is Discovering the Solomonic Wall in Jerusalem, published in 2009. This is Shoham Academic, and it was published in the city of Jerusalem. Two great places to look for it. One is Amazon, and another is my favorite book buying site, which is kind of an overseeing website that takes into account different libraries all over the world, and that's called abebooks.com. It used to be Advanced Book Exchange, but now it's just abbreviated to abebooks.com. You can find great new and especially used books there. And there are times that you can find a book through Abe that you can't find through Amazon. So we're looking at this map here to see exactly where Solomon decided to extend the city. And the old city wall essentially follows this red line right here. So if you can see that red dotted line, that represents the line of the wall of the Jebusite city David captured. And so the building construction at this point was going to go northward, because it couldn't go into the Kidron Valley. That's not a good option. It couldn't go into the Central Valley. That wasn't a good option. And then it was valley down here. So they really only had one direction to go at this point, and that was to the north. So we have the large stone structure. If you remember, that's the Palace of David that we're convinced that Eilat Mazar excavated here near Area G in Jerusalem. And then this is the area right here where all of these fortifications are found. Eilat Mazar suggests that the wall, and that's part of this fortification, that part here is wall, and this part here, casemate, is a wall. So she projects that the wall didn't go straight like this, which would take you out of the city, but instead that the wall would have bowed this way. And apparently it's too difficult or impossible to actually do the excavation there in this area to know for sure, but she suggests that the wall would have bent this way and probably come much more toward the south. But this is the area that we're going to be looking at and to see the excavations. So again, this is to the north of the old city of Jerusalem, called in the Bible the city of David more than anything else. And here is a look at a kind of a blow-up of that very construction that she found. And again, we're not talking about complete structures. We're talking about the foundational remnants of walls in most cases. Sometimes there's an extension of the wall that's been preserved that goes up several feet or meters, but usually it's just closer to the foundational level. So it's especially what you see in black here that's actual material that was discovered. What is not in black is going to be projected by the archaeological team to kind of fill out what's missing, what's not really visible or hasn't been excavated or can't be excavated, because in some cases it's been robbed out in antiquity and then reused for building material somewhere else. So you can see that part of a gate is here, and so this whole unit here is called the Gate House by Eilat Mazar. And you can see the 4 chambers at least that are known. One, and then this is suggested on this side, so it's in red to tell you that it's not fully there. And then this here, and so the gatehouse extends then to this direction as well. So one would have gone to the tower through the gatehouse in this direction, and then this direction is looking out down onto the slope that goes below. So any attackers would have to ascend up the slope and somehow scale the tower or something, or find a way to go under it, or burrow under it, or break through it if they were going to attack you. But of course, if you have a tower above, you can fire down weapons, or you can drop hot oil or whatever on them and make life kind of difficult. So this is where the tower itself is. And then there's this extra tower extension over here that some of that has been excavated. So it's clear that it wasn't just the main large tower, but there was an addition here. And essentially then, here is part of the wall, and then over here going in that direction is the other part of the wall. And there are really 2 different types of wall. So why that was the case, we don't really know. Maybe it's safe to say that because we don't have enough of the walls that have been found and excavated, we really can't answer that question even for ourselves. But you have a straight wall going this way, and then here you have this specific kind of wall called a casemate wall, which we saw earlier was used in Canaan back in the period before the Israelites arrived. But it's not very popular. It's not very many periods in time where you see casemate walls. So the majority of what you're going to find in Canaan of casemate walls is going to be in the 10th century. So at sites such as Hatzor and at Gezer and Megiddo, we see casemate walls all in the 10th century, and almost certainly all of those are part of the Solomonic fortifications of the walls at that point. So we have this characteristic casemate wall that extends here and then would come out. And again, Eilat Mazar suggests that the wall would have, at this point, bowed a little bit and sort of bent to the south as we go. So tower, gate, extra tower, and then the final thing to mention here is this, what she calls a royal structure. So she's suggesting that the royal structure represents either Solomon's palace, which we haven't discovered anywhere else at the site yet, so maybe this is it, or at least it is some type of facility that would have been directly under the authority of the king and is connected to the administration of the nation. So that's the structure. Let's look at a different view to see what else this looks like. And so this image here gives us an artist's reconstruction of what it would have looked like in Solomon's day if we could superimpose the parts of the buildings that aren't extant, and we could kind of build it up and put people on it. So you can see the slope, the very steep slope below, so this would be extremely defensible, without a doubt. Then here is the main tower. You can see how high it is here, and then so the tower unit extends here, and there's a courtyard as part of this, where it depicts people walking. And then that tower extension is here, that extra tower that Mazar refers to. And why there was an extra portion of it, it's difficult to say, but it was built, this extra portion. And then right here, this is this royal structure. So it would be somewhere down inside of this unit that either you have a special Solomonic palace or a structure that's directly under the influence and instruction of the king that would be royal. So this is what this gate complex looks like. And you can see that the architecture here is very, very intense and complex. And so these monumental fortifications are a strong reason why we should assert that in the 10th century BC, and again, the casemate wall suggests to us that it was definitely 10th century, that connecting this to Solomon demonstrates that we have, number one, we have a workforce that's very that's required to fulfill the responsibilities of building such massive structures as this. So that implies a strong central authority and administration, and it implies there are finances there, and it implies that there are people, whether slave workers or paid workers, who can be brought together to complete such a project as massive as this. So all of this is part of the extension of the city of David, or an extension of the city of Jerusalem, so that you could have more that would be defended, and so that anyone who would be building homes or whatever and living in this area or working in this area could be protected from any attack from outsiders. So all of this is evidence for a strong central authority and a governmental structure in place in Israel, in the capital of the nation, and we would suggest under the reign of Solomon. So we looked at an artist's reconstruction of what it would have looked like at this gate complex and all of the structures that were there. Now let's look at just a little bit of the evidence that was left behind, and we'll start with some of the very gatehouse itself. And you can see that there are walls built along here, and so this all would have been part of this gate complex. You can see a straight line here of the gate, and this would be an outer extremity. And this would be essentially a divider between chambers, and this is another divider between chambers. So we have chambers in each one of these areas, defining for us clearly a gate. So anyone who wanted to access the tower had to go through the gate to get into or onto the tower. So that would essentially be an extra level of protection for the defenders who were up on the gate, stopping anyone from below from attacking the city. Then this is another view here, and this gives you, with a person standing here, a little bit of a perspective on the size of this monumental architecture. Again, suggesting to us that we have a very strong and hefty workforce, because it would not be an easy job at all. And then this is one final, more close-up look at the gatehouse. And so you can see part of the walls here that define the various rooms in the structure, both the gate itself and then the accompanying chambers. There's one bit of evidence here, this frog, that you're wondering, well, why would you want to show us a frog? Good question. It's because this frog represents very datable material cultural artifact evidence. It's from a very specific time, and parallels make it clear to us that this is a scaraboid that would date to this window of time from the middle of the 11th century, so about 1050 BC, to about 900 BC. So it has to be 11th century or 10th century BC. And clearly, there's no evidence that this structure was built during the Late Bronze Age 1, so it's almost certainly not 12th century, 11th century, so that pretty much leaves the 10th century BC as the right time frame for the building of it, because this frog scaraboid, which again is dated stylistically, was found beneath the lower floor of the royal structure, that building that we suggested may be Solomon's palace, as the Bible describes, the house that Solomon built. Dating the palace's initial phase to no later than this period. So if you can find evidence that's at the foundations or under the foundations of the structure, clearly that's going to be connected to the time frame when the building was made. So this frog is extremely helpful in allowing us to date the structure itself. So now that we've finished our discussion of the Solomonic fortification, that gate complex that demonstrates elaborate architectural design and construction, we want to move our attention forward in time to the end of the 8th century BC, when the Neo-Assyrian Empire has been attacking Judah. Remember, several decades before, sometime before, they had captured the northern kingdom of Israel that was centered in Samaria. They overcame them. They killed off many of the people, and the survivors were sent to the far regions of the empire of the Neo-Assyrians and essentially lived out the rest of their lives as slaves. But the Judite kingdom God preserved, and yet it was under attack by one of the new kings who had risen up, and his name was Sennacherib. And in 701 BC, he invaded Judah, and it says in his own records that he conquered 46 cities. Well, the crown jewel, of course, was the city of Jerusalem. The king at this time of the Judite monarchy was Hezekiah, and he called out and cried out to the Lord for help. And of course, the Lord ended up helping him, and on his behalf, preventing the king of the Assyrian Empire, Sennacherib, from conquering the city. There was no real siege on the city like there was on other cities, such as we looked at the site of Lachish in a previous lesson. So what would happen to Jerusalem? Well, again, God preserved it, He protected it. But before all of that happened, before God confounded the army of the Assyrians, there was that period of time when the Judite people living here just didn't know what was going to happen. And they had to focus all of their attention on defensive measures that needed to be taken to protect the city. So, our focus for now is going to be on the defensive measures instituted by Hezekiah at Jerusalem to be able to ward off the Neo-Assyrians who were coming for them. And this shot here shows you Jerusalem, essentially with these broken lines. So this is much after the time of Solomon, who, remember, he extended the city to the north, but this is an extension that almost certainly can be attributed to Hezekiah. So that was one of his needs, was to protect the people who were here. Now, what this suggests to us, the fact that he built a wall that extended the city to the west, so this became essentially at the time West Jerusalem, if you will. The need was because of one very important thing. The city of Jerusalem expanded greatly in its population. Well, what would it be that caused their population to grow? What spurred this growth on? It probably wasn't just typical, women having a lot more children than they ever had before. Instead, it was all that was going on in the region as a result of the attacks by the Neo-Assyrians. For example, at the time that they invaded the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, probably some of the Jewish people who were in the north, in the other tribes, took the opportunity, knowing of the danger that there could be, to stay and try to resist the attack, they probably fled to the south and moved in to Judah and kind of got under the umbrella of the Judite kingdom and the Judite king. So that's one phase, one point in time that would cause a swell in the population. And another reason why the population would be greater is at the time that King Sennacherib came and invaded the city, he not only invaded Jerusalem, remember, he invaded all of Judah. And Jerusalem was the last city that he would go after, the capital. So city after city, as he penetrated the region, the people there who would see the handwriting on the wall and would hear about what happened to the other cities, many of them would have fled before the army actually arrived to sack their city and maybe kill them. So they fled into the capital knowing that that's the safe haven. That's the place to go for protection. So what we see here is an extension of the city, a new part of the city that's made, and again, walled with this defensive wall so that all of the occupants who had moved in, who couldn't fit in the old, if you will, city of David or the old Jerusalem, if they would move in this area, they would have a place that they could settle, but again, it would need to be defended. This shot shows us some very important things. If you look at the gray line here, this is the line of the present, what's called the Old City Wall. So if you go to Jerusalem today, you will have to somehow pass through one of the gates or over it, however you choose, to get into the old, what's called the Old City. That's pretty much what it goes by in English. That's the Old City. So all of that gray area is Old City. And remember, this is the original southeastern spur. That's the old Jebusite city. Solomon extended it to the north, and he built the Temple Mount here and placed the temple right in this area. So the first temple, the Jews call it the first temple, is located right there. And then, so this was the original city. And basically where you see the number ones here, and this is in red, I've put a number 1 here to show you the original city wall. So in the time period after Solomon, that then became the city wall for Jerusalem. So what was it that Hezekiah needed to do to prepare for the invasion by Sennacherib? How could he make sure that his people would survive, the people who were living there in Jerusalem? And that's what we're going to look at. The passage for us to understand that is in 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse 5. So we'll read through that, and then we'll focus on one at a time what are those key elements that we can look at archaeologically. So here's the text. So Hezekiah, and that's implied, he, but Hezekiah is who is meant here. So he, Hezekiah, strengthened himself. So I guess the first thing he had to do is kind of gird up his loins, gain some moxie, gain strength, gain trust, acquire courage like Joshua did. So he gained his courage, he strengthened himself, he built up all of the wall having been broken, and he raised it to the level of the towers. Now in relation to the outside, he built another wall, and he strengthened the fortress of the city of David and made weapons in abundance, along with shields. So those are some of the things that King Hezekiah did in Judah, in Jerusalem, to protect the people and protect the city from invasion. All right, so again, let's look at some of those things one at a time. First, Hezekiah built up all of the wall having been broken. What does that mean? Well, he raised it up to the level of the towers also, but this is any part of the original city wall that was somehow dilapidated or broken down. And remember, it had been several centuries since Solomon had built these extensions onto the city to have more city wall, and plus the older city wall below it in the southeastern spur in this area would have been far older too. So hundreds of years later, over that time, probably parts of the wall were broken down. And now is the time that they had to strengthen themselves, because any portion of the wall that looked broken down to the Assyrians who were going to attack would mean this is a soft spot where they could indeed penetrate into the city. So he had to fortify the wall that was already built. And at any points where it was low, he built it up in its height all the way to the point of where the towers were. Remember, we saw that Solomon had built towers on this new extension of the wall that he had built. So the height of the wall was built to equal the towers around the perimeter of the city as it already existed. Now, we actually have this in the archaeological record. If you look here in the area that Kathleen Kenyon excavated in probably the 1950s, I think it was. If not, then definitely in the 60s. This is part of the area in Jerusalem that she excavated. It's known as Area A, and she encountered part of this wall that would have been around the city in the days of the kings of Judah. So here is another shot of part of the original wall that was part of the city wall around Jerusalem. So you can see that the wall only goes up to a certain extent, and obviously in antiquity it would have been built up a lot higher. So as time went along, even after Hezekiah completed all the construction, it would have been brought down in many areas. Well, this is part of the wall that survived. So that's original wall around Jerusalem, probably dating to 10th or 11th century BC. And I would even suggest 11th century BC. And here's another look at part of that outer original wall that extends around the city of Jerusalem at the time. So this is the wall that wherever it was torn down, he built up, and then he extended the height of the wall to equal the towers. And then one final look even closer at some of the stones of this at the time would have been a very formidable wall. Now we're going to turn our attention to the second thing that we can look at archaeologically with Hezekiah's defenses. And it's found here. And in relation to the outside, he built another wall. So not the first wall, a second wall, a new wall, if you will. So he built this second wall, and this must be the new extension of the city wall that protruded to the west from the original city of David. So remember, the green line essentially is showing us the original wall. And so what he's doing is he's building, number 2, and you can see it in red, he's building this extension all the way around the city of Jerusalem. So he's incorporating this new western area where many people have moved to, and they needed to be preserved, because if they were not protected when the Assyrians came, then they would be attacked and easily slaughtered. So he had to build a wall around their homes and their communities in this western part of Jerusalem. There are excavations that show a part of this wall, this outer wall. And excavation was done in 1967. This portion of that very wall, it's known as the Broad Wall from that time and pretty much until today. And you can see where that was, this area here, you can see where it is on this map over here. Right there is the remains of the Broad Wall that were excavated in 1967, showing you part of that wall. And since then, a couple other parts have been found, but this is basically the line then of the city wall once Hezekiah added that extension. So that's Avigad was the excavator here, and this was indeed that new wall that was built to be able to enclose a greater part of the city. And even if you go there today, you can look and see that very part of the wall where you have essentially a seam in the wall or a turn where the direction slightly changed. And it's been enclosed. There's concrete all built around it, so you can look down at it from above if you're visiting the Jewish quarter That's where it is. If you go to Jerusalem today, go into the Jewish quarter, ask around, they'll point you to the broad wall, and you can see it for yourself. Part of this wall that Hezekiah built to the west of the original city of Jerusalem. So this is the first reason why we have a major addition onto the city, and it's to the west. And of course, in later times, it would mostly be to the west that the city would continue to grow. Then, the third thing and final thing that we'll look at in these countermeasures is, number 3, that Hezekiah strengthened the fortress of the city of David and made weapons in abundance along with the shields. So, how is it that he strengthened the fortress? Part of it is this area here, the thing that we call the Milo. And that goes back all the way to the days that David and Solomon were there. And when David had his house built, his palace, he improved on or modernized the Milo that is this area here that was right near his palace. And again, today we know it as the stepped stone structure. And here's a close-up for you to see. And you can go there today and see part of this stepped stone structure. So the original date for the area in purple here, this stepped stone structure, is the 10th to 9th century BC. So this would have been part of what Hezekiah did. And it says King Hezekiah then had to solve the problem of how the people of Jerusalem would drink water during the anticipated Assyrian siege of the city, as the Gihon spring was located outside the city wall. Especially, he would have to do this if the Assyrians were to gain access to the spring itself. So if Hezekiah allowed the Assyrians to gain access to the water source, the Gihon spring, that would be disaster, because then they would be able to provide for their soldiers and for their army, and somehow they may be able to stop up that water source from being accessed by the Israelites. So, from where else did Jerusalem access its drinking water? Was there any other place that they got their water? Well, the answer is no. The only source of Jerusalem's water at this time was the Gihon spring. So Solomon's work had to focus on the protection of his water source, the Gihon spring, and eliminating access to it on the part of the Neo-Assyrians. This is a shot of the Gihon spring itself. Just as we saw with Hezekiah's tunnel, we see that there's limestone wall all around, and you can see this exit way for the water to come through this channel. The spring's waters flow from beneath the stairs, which are probably medieval in origin. So even though you see the staircase here, don't think that goes back until Hezekiah's day. Instead, it's almost certainly from the medieval period. But it was built there for a reason, and that was related to the position of the water and the water source itself, from the issuing out from that spring, that underground spring, issuing water. Here is the Gihon spring cave itself, just to give you a glimpse of what it looks like in the very area where that water finds its derivation. So it comes out here. Here's another look at it. Historically, water flowed from here down into what's called Channel 2. It's also known as the Siloam Channel. What does that look like? Well, here's how to understand it. The Gihon spring is here, and so the water essentially was coming forth from here, and it headed down this way, down this channel on the outside of the city. So this is down in the area of the valley itself, the Kidron Valley. So what they did is they made this tunnel, this channel, actually not a tunnel, but a channel, to be able to move water down down along that ridge, the Kidron Valley, and then into this area here, where it was down below at just to the south of the city of David. So again, this is the city of David. This is the Tyropaian Valley. This is valley down here, and the Kidron Valley is here, and it ends up turning a little bit to the west as it goes to the south. And so this area here is the extension of the city where it ends. And so the water would come along this way and end up in this area. And essentially this was water that would be used by any of the residents of Jerusalem who were out from the city and in the valley area, maybe growing crops or tending to their flocks of animals or whatever. In their daily work, they would need water. So the Siloam Channel, which was around all the way in the Middle Bronze Age, that's how far back it goes, at least, to the Middle Bronze Age. It was in use that long. That was a water source for people outside the city. But obviously, if the Neo-Assyrians are coming, you don't want to give them access to this. So what they had to do is bottle up this Siloam Channel from access. So here is a worm's eye view of the Siloam Tunnel, and you can see something very important at the top. You see the stones here, the boulders? Okay, that's limestone, that's bedrock, if you will, on one side, and here's the second side. But these are boulders, independent boulders. So here's the idea. You had this very deep channel that was dug at some point in Jerusalem's history. And with that tunnel, you had then a tool, a conduit, if you will, to move the water downhill to be able to allow people access to it all along that area outside the city wall. And so in times of peace, it's not a problem. You can leave it open and exposed. But something very important was done by Hezekiah and his people at this point. In order to fortify this area, one of the things that he would have done is stop up that gap in the top of the channel with massive stones. We can call them boulders. Just dropping boulders in there to be able to close up that exposed part of the channel. So if you put enough boulders there, you can then put dirt on top, smooth it over, and make it look like typical ground anywhere. And so that was all part of this fortification system, making the place defensible and preventing your enemy from getting access to your water source. So that's part of what they did. So Hezekiah could not depend on the Siloam Channel as the Judites' source of drinking water during the anticipated siege against Jerusalem. And here's the reason. The pool to which it transported water remained outside of the city walls, both before and after the fortifications that he built. Moreover, the Siloam Channel became a bigger problem. The Assyrians could have access to this abundant water now. So King Hezekiah decided to do this. He decided and this is 2 Chronicles 32, 3 and 4. He decided with his officers and his warriors to cut off the supply of water from the springs which were outside the city. And they helped him. Thus many people assembled, and they stopped up all the springs and the stream flowing in the midst of the area, saying, "Why should the kings of Assyria come and find abundant water?" So archaeologically, we can see the remnants of just what they did in 701 BC or just before to prevent the Assyrians from having water at their city. The springs spouted from the Gihon, and the stream is the water in the Siloam Channel. How did they stop it up? Well, again, archaeology provides the answer, and here's a little bit better view. You can see here some stones, and even more clearly, you can see a collection, if you will, of boulders that have been dropped right down in that wedge-shaped gap to be able to prevent access or even visible sight from above. So everything below here was fine, but this area was stopped up. This is a shot of the Siloam Channel near the Pool of Siloam. So that's the channel that was around since the Middle Bronze Age, the one that extended southward on the eastern flank of the city, at the base of the city in the Kidron Valley, right? So this is part of it near the Pool of Siloam. So this is basically where it ends up. This is kind of the end of the road for that channel. King Hezekiah thus constructed an underground tunnel which would take water from the Gihon Spring to a storage pool inside the city. This tunnel was an engineering masterpiece, one that still stands today as a tribute to the indefatigable laborers who completed the work under the merciful watch care of God. Although the Gihon Spring gushes no more, it still issues water that travels down the famous tunnel that Hezekiah built in 701 BC. So what Hezekiah did is he built a new waterway connected to the Gihon Spring that would guide water into the city, within the city walls, so that his people could gain access to it. And here it is right here. From the Gihon Spring, this tunnel that we call the Hezekiah's Tunnel would move water into this pool area inside the city wall. And you can see the city wall here. And so that pool area is the Siloam, the original Siloam pool, where water would be collected so that the Israelites inside the city could, on a daily basis, draw water from here. You can see in this shot the Gihon Spring, and here is the movement of that. And in this shot here, the movement of this Hezekiah's water channel that brought water into the city of Jerusalem. So there you have it, a look at some of the architectural construction at the site of Jerusalem to show you both Solomonic building constructions and fortifications by Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, several centuries later to defend against an attack. And all of this shows us that the narrative we read about in the Bible has historical accuracy. Sure, there are a lot of things that we can't pin down that we would like to historically that are found in the Bible, but there are some that we can. And they should reinforce our trust and our faith in the historicity of the text of the Bible. And that's important because if we don't have such faith in the history in the Bible, it leaves us room to start to doubt and not be as convinced about the spiritual message in the Bible. It's all connected. It's all interconnected. We can trust both the historical message and the spiritual message because the Word of God is just that very thing. It's the revelation of God's will and God's works through mankind, through His powerful means, to make His name great on the earth. And that's what it's all about, making God's name great on the earth. And my hope is that as we've continued through this course and we have a couple lessons to go, my hope is that your trust in the Word of God has grown and will grow more. And my hope is that you will help me to make God's name great on the earth. We'll see you next time in our class, Basics of Biblical Archaeology.